And now my role is a great pleasure to introduce our chairman, Mr. Galateri. And, well, I'll ask our chairman to introduce himself throughout 3 numbers or 3 words.
Okay. Thank you very much, Lucia. I have to say, first of all, that I'm very happy to be here again with you. This room and this school is a fantastic occasion for me, because, as I said in other occasions, it remembers me when I was sitting among the ranks and hearing someone coming from outside. So I hope to interpret your expectations. So the question is, what do I have as 3, not numbers, because I don't play the lottery, but 3 things that come to my mind after having been last weekend. I hope that you have been all here. We had a fantastic weekend with the Barcolana. I never had in my life, and I lived in many countries, in many companies, but this mix of boats, sun, wind, people, was really fantastic. And living there and visiting also the Amerigo Vespucci, the Navy boat for training, and the 3 things that, in my opinion, are important for people like you and for us are competence. We need to be people prepared. If we want to contribute to the society, there is no way we can do it by generic approaches to problems, as unfortunately we see sometimes around us these days. Second, obviously, ethics, which is part of the sustainability. There is no way professional can be good if it is not linked with respect of rules, of reputation, of contents in line with the society expectations, and courage. You will be confronted, so often during your life, as I've been, with decisions that need courage. There is no way you can escape moments in which you will have to make decisions. And decisions need courage. The only thing that I can add, it is not a 4th comment, but I'd like to stress it, is that if you follow these rules, you will have success. My experience is that whenever I was in front of difficult choices, changing career, changing places to work, changing environments, and so on, if you use your competence, the respect of the rules, and you have some courage, it works. So I really wish for all of you this kind of success, because I really am very happy about my past history, and particularly of being in the insurance, because it seems to me that insurance and governance, which are the 2 things that more recently I've been managing or acting, are a real good mix to offer a good life, a good engagement, and to really have the sense that you contribute to the world. But let's not lose time without taking your difficult questions, Lucia.
Well, so you mentioned competence, you mentioned ethics, and you mentioned courage. 10 years ago, there was a big crisis, the big financial crisis, because of Lehman Brothers. What do you think the financial institutions learned from that lesson? And what was the role of the insurance sector?
Yeah, I think I didn't think about that, but I agree that you can connect the 3 words I said before with what happened in 2008 and the consequences, because I'm not an historian, so I know things, from the fact that I lived part through the markets and partly by reading. Undoubtedly, the consequences that explain also the problems of 2008 were lack of transparency. I mean, you cannot operate without clear responsibility on what you do. And at that time, as you remember, with the question of subprimes, the action of some operators was to put together credits of doubtful quality and selling them to people without explaining clearly what they were. This was the origin of all the crises. And I think, therefore, that the first consequence was more transparency. And, one example is the recent IDD regulation from the European Commission that states clearly with very heavy fines that products and services that are sold to the market have to have a very transparent pricing, very transparent indication of risk, a very transparent compatibility with the necessity of the client, so as to avoid the first big mistake, bad fact that was at that time realized. The second thing, which is a consequence also of this, is a better separation of risk management. At that time, banks were operating with total ease and total freedom, their capital, the capital of the clients, investing in speculative operations. After 2008, there were rules, the famous in the United States Dodd-Frank Act in 2010, and then the Volcker rule later on, that separated the two businesses, so that the banks have to do commercial banking on one side. If they want to do investment banking, it's another business on another side. So you separate, you can't put in jeopardy the money of your clients with the money of the bank, because it creates a very improper mix of strategies, objectives, and considerations. And the third, I have to admit, looking at my friend Corinthi, that it is inevitable, is the capital requirements that came out of that situation, the famous Basel II and Basel III for the banks, the famous Solvency II for insurances, that in themselves are correct. One always thinks, why did we have to go to 2008 to understand that it was necessary? That is, if you take risks, you have to have the necessary capital in front of those risks in order not to go towards the risk of bankruptcies. So now there are very strict rules depending on the assets in which you invest, what kind of capital you need. So the concept in itself is quite sane, quite good. We apply it with great attention. At the same time, the burden of all this regulation is making so that between the business activity of making products, selling products, complying with the results of the products, and all the back office activity to make this come true, it becomes very heavy, in the sense that I was talking before with some of you. Boards today spend, I would even say, more than half of their time going through thick books of regulations, and this, unfortunately, in my opinion, is a little bit too much, because, of course, you need regulations, you need to know them, but you need to do business. I'm coming, as you probably know, from industrial experiences. I was working with Fiat for 25 years, and then I was chairman of Mediobanca, then chairman with Telecom Italia, together with my friend Minucci, then chairman of Generali, and you see the difference from the industrial world and the financial world. In the industrial world, of course, you have regulations, but the bulk of the decision-making of the boards are industrial. You talk about products, investments, clients, and the connection in the real arena. In finance, often you have to read books and books and books of rather complicated instructions. Of course, they are necessary to a certain extent, but my wish is that at least they stabilize, so that when we implement a regulation, 2 months after, we don't start with a new regulation, because you really spend a lot of money, a lot of efforts, and sometimes these efforts, don't go really to the end, because a lot of people cannot really follow actively all the specific indications. So we really have to be cautious in making regulations which are really applicable and really understandable, and therefore really applied in the good sense. Because you see, the sense of our discussion today, as I'm just saying now, is that everything can be good to improve the world, to improve the way we operate, but it has to be lived as part of the real life. Sustainability, integration of sustainability with business is essential, because it has to become part of what you do, not because it is something more that you have to do on top of your activity. And as I will say later, to me this was particularly clear when I studied and I managed the governance committee of the Stock Exchange, where initially I myself approached governance as a sort of additional, how do you see it called in school, additional part of the curriculum. You have finance, you have marketing, you have, and then you have sustainability. No, sustainability has to be spread on all the other activities. There is no action whatsoever in your professional life, and in my opinion, even in your personal life, where you cannot operate with a sort of sustainable understanding and feeling. Because sustainability means doing things that last over time. Apart all the acronym, ESG, and I never remember exactly what they mean, but let's say that they mean environment, governance, and social, but someone says other names, so I say, but what is it? Is it another ESG? Anyway, apart from ESG, sustainability means what I said before, operating competently, ethically, and courageously for the well-being of the clients and the world.
Thank you. And in terms of Lehman Brothers, again, it was a kind of wake-up call. It helped really to understand that ethics, long-term, and listening to stakeholders are, essential component, as you said, of the way we do business. And what about governance? Because many people say that Lehman Brothers was a crisis of trust, and the trust was really linked to the way the companies were managed. And you chaired an important committee in the corporate governance committee at Borsa Italiana, and last couple of years ago, when we created a sustainability and governance committee in Generali at the board level. So what do you think is the level of governance in Italy, and how we can improve it?
Well, as I mentioned, governance is a very good example of how things should be, in my opinion, made and confronted. You see, the strange thing, as I already said, is that the principles of governance of the OECD were, presented and prepared maybe, 25 years ago. But the application of governance came through the times much later. And I always wonder why certain principles of governance that we apply today were not applied before, and we needed to write them in the code of self-discipline in order to make come true. Because let's make a brief history. I mean, in Italy, governance in the scientific terms started in 1999 when the Testo Unico della Finanza was prepared after the Parmalat event, and at the same time, more or less, the Committee on Governance of the Stock Exchange was prepared, was organized, and started writing the Code of Self-Discipline. And we started with a certain key element of the governance. Always with the attitude that now we have to add some regulations to what the companies do. Then little by little, it was difficult because through the governance committee, I really saw the evolution, at least in Italy, of the society. In the beginning, affirming, for example, the principle of the need of independence of at least some of the directors was seen as sort of attack to the society. You cannot imagine, and I see the people that were sitting around the table at that time, I could have names and surnames, say, no, I mean, this is not, this guy is independent, and this guy was, along all the lines of responsibility inside the company, says, how can he be independent? So it was very difficult to implement some elementary principles. Then, in 2011, we reformed the committee, and we started an entirely new approach to governance, with, society in the meanwhile evolved. The 2008 disaster had happened, so the change in culture and approach from the participants was extremely visible and almost physically visible. And we started introducing very precise principles, looking at the international codes of self-discipline, looking at the principles of the OECD, in terms of how the board had to work, in terms of how the remuneration policies has to work, in terms on how the committees of the board had to work. And then progressively we introduced, until the very recent times, I think it was a few months ago, that we introduced, in line with the fact that the law on diversity is going to expire in Italy, the law that requires the boards to have at least 1/3 of their composition made by the gender less represented. We, as this law will expire in a little time, we introduced directly into the Code of Self-Discipline the same rule, so that it will remain even though the law will expire. And so this question of gender diversity, the question of sustainability, the question, and other questions that were very important in managing a company. The fact that seems a stupid thing, but the preemptive information to board members before they go to the board, it seems an elementary fact, but it had to be introduced into the code, and it is still one of the areas that the governance committee monitors because, believe it or not, some companies still are not complying correctly to the fact that they have to indicate the number of days in which they send the information to the board members before the board, and if they respect that rule, based on the question, on the concept that you well know, comply or explain. If they don't do it, they have to say why. It seems so obvious that this has to happen, because how can you imagine that a board member can come to the board and not know exactly what he's going to decide on? But I can tell you that years ago, when I was in the board of a bank, a small regional bank, it was my first fight there, and I immediately got the attention of all the rest of the management of the board, and not a nice attention, is that when I found myself coming into the board without a piece of paper and found in front of my seat like this of documents to be looked into and to be decided on, it was a ridiculous situation. And if you wonder why those things have happened in the past, it's because of that. How can you expect a board member to decide on things that, he looks at that moment? And you can imagine the documents in a bank where you have, individual companies to be financed, and you have to decide on that, looking, if you have the time. At the time, I remember, I could only look immediately to the net worth and to the level of debt. You would discover incredible and impossible things. So I was asking, but how can you give, 500,000 euros of loan to someone that has 5,000 euros of net worth? And the typical answer, oh, no, but they have buildings, they have this and that. So, this was the way things operated years ago. Now, the concept is, of course, this has changed, but my question is, why were we in that situation? Why no one would have said, go away. This is not the way you can do any kind of business. But this is what was happening. And a lot of other small things, things have evolved. Now, to reassure you, from 2011 on, we did an enormous job in that committee. The code has been changed with the introduction of several additions, as I indicated before. And we started also something I consider very interesting, and we will have, even though I left the chairmanship of the committee, but I'm still in the committee, we will have in a few weeks the meeting that I started years ago with the top man of the governance committee of the other major European countries, France, Germany, UK, Holland. We started 1 or 2 meetings a year to confront the reciprocal rules of the different codes, and with a lot of satisfaction I can tell you that we are absolutely in line with the other codes now, and in some cases we, as the neophyte do often, we are even ahead of them sometimes, pushing for new things, particularly on this question of sustainability. So I'm very proud to say that the rules in Italy today are perfectly aligned with the rest of Europe. Question is that we still need to implement them actually fully. So we have a good level of implementation. We do the monitoring every year. When things do not go along the lines, we call the companies in order to obtain the respect of the rules. And so I'm quite confident that this is taking place. But the real question that I have to myself is, why do we have to arrive to 2011, 12, 15, 18, to apply things that were already, in a way, present in the principles of OECD 20 years ago without noticing it. The fact that you have to be transparent in the remuneration policies and that you have to have variable parts of the remuneration is not a very scientific concept or very clever concept. It's a very common sense concept, but still. So my question now is, what today should we still do in order that Lucia in 5 years doesn't come to me and say, why didn't you think in 2018 it was obvious that you had to do this? But I hope that now we are really in line with the best practices.
Well, as you can understand, our chairman is really challenging his management to do even better.
Yeah, because they have to be the best of the world. They are close, but not yet the best.
And what we are sharing is a journey, really a journey, and every day we want to do better than the previous day. And sustainability is really about dealing with complexity, really dealing with mega trends. Our board members has to take a complex decision because our world is even more complex, and every day there is something more, something different, and information is flowing very fast. So my question for you is really about, how about megatrends, climate change, demographic change, cyber? What do you think about these megatrends, and in your experience, how to deal with that complexity?
Are you ready for a full day of discussion? Well, I'll be brief, but I like very much this kind of question because, I mean, briefly, I want to comment more on technology and on sustainability. But briefly, you know, insurance, as you understand, I learned insurance only a few years ago when I joined Generali, but it's really a great area of activity because it really confronts the major challenges that we have around the world today. Insurance, as you know, is a question of protecting people and companies from risk, which are remote but foreseeable, and sharing the cost with the people having the same necessity. But what kind of risk? I mean, sometimes I put myself in front of the mirror saying, but what are the risks today? And it seems to me that, unfortunately, we have a lot of risk, and maybe even more risk than before. Just a quick list with some specific indication for each. Geopolitical. Huge risk everywhere. You turn around your head, looking, of course, Italy, UK, Brexit, US, Argentina, Brazil, the Middle East, some countries in Asia, huge risk. But huge risk also because of this problem of immigration. You have 70 million refugees moving around the world a year. I mean, it's amazing. It's something that really scares everyone. It's one of the biggest worries of managers today. When they invest, what's going to happen in the country where they're investing? Second, climate, as you said. Climate, there are some numbers that are really astonishing. I was impressed by the fact that not only the last few years were the warmest year since they started measuring, but the level of the sea, the rate of increase of the level of the sea in the last 150 years has been higher than in the previous 2 millennia. Therefore, in 150 years, you know, the world has changed in such a way, which you can imagine what kind of implication it has in terms also of insurance, in terms of risk for all the cities that live along the coast and so on. Aging, notwithstanding the fact that you have a very low average age in this room, it's incredible how it moved. In 1956, the average age around the world was 48 years. In 2016, 60 years after, it's 72, from 48 years to 72. You can imagine, I have a mother of one and one, and I had the problem of coming here today because in this moment, she was not feeling well, even though this morning when I called her, I said, "How are you, mommy?" She said, "Very well." So I said, "Okay, then I can go." So you have me here. But this is the world, and you can imagine what kind of consequences in terms of security, in terms of healthcare, and so on this implies. Volatility of the markets, financial markets. I won't touch this because you just open the newspaper and you find the problems, you know, with the volatility of the market. And technology. The technology creates a lot of huge risk. Cybersecurity, $600 billion a year of losses and damages from cybersecurity. So, you know, this is a huge area of risk. But at the same time, also a huge area of opportunity, particularly with technology. I'm chairing also with great pleasure the Italian Institute of Technology. I'm not a scientist, but I was put there in order to ensure two things. Governance, because these centers of research often they are led by scientists who are great, but they have little attention to the aspect of governance, you know, rules, balance sheets, investments, finances, and so on. So normally they hit the wall after a few years. So I'm there to guarantee this doesn't happen. And to guarantee the second thing with my industrial experience, that research goes into economy, so that they don't just, I ask pardon to the researcher present here, but research cannot end in the books or in publications or even citations. Research has to end in specific applications that produce products, services that then can in turn produce a return that can finance research. So in that institute, I mentioned it because the way technology moves and develops, it's absolutely extraordinary. We work in robotics, nanotechnologies, life sciences, and computational science. It's amazing to see how even a little robot, we have a light cube, I follow its growth, and it's really like a baby. It starts small, you know, it just doesn't know much about around him. I remember the first day when they showed me the little robot in a room. He didn't know anything, so he started moving. He was bumping against every wall. Then little by little, with artificial intelligence, started identifying what was there, and in the end, it was moving without any problem. And this is a minimal fact of what later on we see now with a huge robot that can move huge blocks of cement, or can drive cars, or can hit and break a wall, particularly for situational catastrophic interventions, or for helping sick people and so on. So technology is fundamental, and even in companies like ours, in the insurance, in services, technology is an enormous help, particularly with the famous big data, data analytics, data management. Now in Generali, we have established areas where there are no more statisticians and mathematicians, so we could not live in that dear minutia anymore in that area. We have to become data analytics people, we have to become innovation people. We have created a 5,000 square meters innovation park in Mogliano Veneto in order to have people operating in those small houses to try to identify products that can prevent, control risk, and protect the people. So we have introduced in the company several instruments, the NPS, which is now a very old instrument, the Net Promoter Score, that allow us to identify every time we meet a customer what are the good points and the bad points of our activity in order to correct them. So we were able to reduce by 23% of the detractors and improve by 18% the promoters, and this reduces enormously the cost. The mobile hub, an application on mobile where you are in direct contact between clients and company in order to understand exactly where your problems are, how they are dealt, at what point your damage compensation is. The digital agent, where you have the agents in connection with the clients in a much quicker and active and dynamic way. And then on top of this, most of open innovation activities. We have started with Microsoft and the Fondazione Cariplo a project called Grow It Up, where we help startups to move, to grow, and the startups then growing, they come to us and they help us in introducing new products and new teams, new solutions, and therefore we move progressively from the old activity of the insurance companies, which was obviously protection, to something more interesting, that is prevention. So with the new technologies, you can identify, the problems in your house, leaks and fire and whatever, before you actually have the problem. Or with the new black boxes in the cars and different devices attached to it, you can identify, the driving style of the driver and helping to correct it so that he has less troubles. Or in health, we had a product, Vitality, that gives reduction of prices to people that will follow a certain program of behavior, going to the gym, eating some food, and so on. So it becomes much more prevention, and then a lot of other applications. This is a great trend. I'm very happy to see that this technological trend that in part I see in the Institute of Technology, but also I see it applied in companies where I'm sitting in different fields. I'm in a food company. I don't know if we can mention the names and make some propaganda or not. Can I? Or I'm going to be criticized by Vladimir. Anyway, I'm the board of Lavazza. It's not really fair to say it here, but I was with Illy the other day, and so at least I balance the support that I'm giving to different companies. And in a fashion company, Moncler, and I see that even in these faraway companies, different from Generali or from pure technological company, these companies constantly are discussing and trying to understand how technology can improve their performance, their connection with the client, always in view of making things sustainable, things that will really be perceived correctly by the customer, things that will help the customer and not damage it. So the concept of sustainability is fantastic. And I go to the last common sustainability, the one by last. I'm the advisory board of Bank of America. You cannot believe when we go there every year, 2-3 times a year, on 1.5 days of discussions, half a day is fully devoted to sustainability issues. I mean, they invest something like $1 billion in those activities, And they take us all for half a day talking how they're good with employees, with clients, with the community, and so on. It's really amazing. Now, going to our company, because I have to speak a little bit about Generali, sustainability for us means several things. Inside the company, we have underwritten the Paris Pledge for Action, the Global Compact, the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, and we try to implement this objective of reducing by 20% of the emission of gas by 2020. So we support the fact that our employees go by train instead of car, that we do teleconferences instead of trips. So there is an idea, and we will reach that goal as far as we are concerned. Then we started last year, and one could say, why only last year? Well, we may be late, but we started to identify a specific investment and underwriting policy, particularly directed to climate change, where we had taken public commitments. In the investments, we had 2 billion euros invested in areas that were connected with coal in one way or another. We decided to divest from those areas completely, save for a minor level that for geopolitical problems, areas like Poland or Czechia, where we cannot move immediately out, but we will engage with the companies in order to move them towards renewables. But it's almost nothing in terms of amount, and we will therefore go almost to zero. In the underwriting, we will do the same thing, in the sense that we will not underwrite or give insurance to companies operating in the coal area. Again, we have a minor exception for the time being for geopolitical reasons in some areas, but more and more we will engage in order to move out of it. And we are investing in green products and in green solutions. So, of course, investing in renewable and in terms of underwriting, making products like the one that I mentioned, Vitality, that connects health with insurance policies, like Wellion, which is a new project that we have in Generali that supports the welfare activity of medium-sized companies, like the same black boxes with the instruments that help the driver to have a more secure life. So we really intend to be very active in our core business. And apart from the core business, we do something very serious with the collectivity. It's called the Human Safety Net. We might have heard about it here in Trieste, because the Human Safety Net, a very interesting project towards the community, started by asking our employees what they want to do in that field. They gave us 300 answers. We chose 100. Out of the 100, we chose 3 projects. Disadvantaged families with kids from 0 to 6, which apparently is the area where the most, the most sensible to be modified in terms of being good citizens and take really the good messages. Employee in entrepreneurship for refugees, which is another huge problem in Italy and in Europe. And third is apparently a problem with neonatality, a problem of asphyxia in the early days of the birth. So we have activated these 3 projects all over the world. We are already present in 16 countries of the world with projects of the different areas. In Italy and in Trieste in particular, we started with my friend Minucci some 6 months ago a project with Villaggio per Crescere in the center of benessere for the kids in Valmaura, where we help parents disadvantaged to entertain kids, and so we help the little kids to hear music, to start learning how to read, to talk, in a certain way. So all this is part of our overall sustainability objective in the company.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one last question for the audience. What is your recommendation? I can see a lot of students here. So what is your recommendation for them in terms of, how they should work? I mean, you already gave 3 key words. And, finally.
Yeah, I mean, to be coherent, but also because I believe in that, I would repeat that. I think that, if I remember myself, when I was at their age, sitting in the rooms of Columbia Business School, because I had my studies at that place, you have a lot of questions in front of you. How am I going to make my life? What am I going to choose? Where am I going to live? What success can I have? I think that you have to have some things very clear and be confident you can get them. First of all, be prepared. I mean, if you're not prepared, there is no way, no chance. I mean, there is no uncle, father, cousin, friend that can help you in life. Of course, they can be a good companion, but they will not determine your life. So count on yourself, and if you cannot count on yourself, then decide to do other businesses, because there is no chance. Second, do it always in the correct way. If you are tempted sometimes to cut the corners, to find a way to make it quicker, doesn't work. I mean, it might work once, you will hit the wall the next time. So keep on working with this and have trust in yourself. If you're good and if you behave well, things will work. And the third is be courageous. Sometimes choices are not easy. You have to risk. But my experience, I cross fingers because I'm not yet completely out of the business, even though unfortunately my statute would make me out of the business recently, approximately. But if you are courageous, if you take the risk, you succeed, 100%. So good luck to all of you.
Thank you, Mr. President.